animal mascots were a dime a dozen in the 90s. For every Sonic the Hedgehog and Battletoads, you had about 50 rejects. Arrow the Acro-Bat, Dynamite Hetty, wait, has it been 15 seconds yet? And Kamikaze the Flying Squirrel. Oh, a name that aged about as well as most of Sonic 1's gameplay. Heyo! Remember to turn comments off. The 90s were chock full of these throwaway characters that have as much of a chance of seeing past the 90s as Kurt Cobain. But one mascot in particular has an interesting story behind it. A story that was way more interesting than the gameplay, which is kind of rare for a 2D platformer. Socks the Cat. Now, to those not around during the Clinton administration, my guess is that's a good chunk of you, that name may not ring a bell, but to those who remember those times, may recall that Socks was the cat of Bill Clinton, the 42nd president of the US, and Reformed Orthodox... actually, it's best I don't let this episode become dated. Now, I know what you're wondering. They made a game based on the president's cat? Well, this made more sense at the time. You see, Socks was not your average cat. This guy was big news. Socks acted as sort of a mascot for the Clinton presidency. He had his own website in the early 90s, no less. He had books coming out. A Muppet version of him was interviewed by Kermit the Frog on The Larry King Show. Hell, they had to get White House staff to answer letters written to the cat. Children took time out of their day to write to a cat. I have no info on how the response letters looked, but I love imagining a page filled top to bottom with the word meow. So especially at a time when animal mascots were all the rage, giving him a game is what makes the most sense in this story. But just who had the balls to tackle such a project? Enter Real-Time Associates, creators of a lot of licensed games nobody really remembers. Hold up, they made Gex 64. Guys, we're in good hands. Along with an unknown developer tasked with developing the Genesis port. After obtaining the license, Real-Time got to work on what they would hope would be the next Sonic the Hedgehog. Here's an interesting fact. The Clintons did not own the license to Socks. Instead, publisher Kaneko had to buy his likeness from the cat's fan club, dubbed the Presidential Socks Partnership. I get kids writing to a cat because they're kids, but for God's sake, who started a fan club for Bill Clinton's cat? And who gave them the licensing? Whatever. Moving on, the cat's likeness was granted to Kaneko, with some of the profits going to some of Hillary Clinton's favorite charities. Now, the rest of the development story isn't super interesting until we get to the reason you may have never heard of this. In 1994, Real-Time Associates got a call from President Bill Clinton. Shut this project down. Were the 4 heartbreaking words that chilled the spines of each employee of Real-Time Associates. You see, Hillary Clinton was not a fan of video games.
It's almost routine in popular games for players to spray other people with Uzis, to drive over pedestrians, to kill police officers, to attack women, and in some cases, even to engage in cannibalism.
With the controversy surrounding video games at the time, the Clintons... Okay, I'm lying. I mean, the Hillary Clinton footage is real, but the real reason this game was canceled was that Nintendo of America didn't allow political figures in their video games. Or at least, that's what some outlets claim, but that's verifiably false information. Look at you, you idiot, you absolute buffoon. Wait, okay, alright, I'll tell you the truth. The actual reason this game was canceled was the American branch of Kaneko shut down in the summer of 1994. Yeah, it turns out that despite Clinton's distaste for video games and Nintendo's odd family-friendly policies, both parties were A-okay with this game. With their publisher shut down, Real-Time Associates quickly pulled the plug on this project, with the game at 100% completion. The game even got review scores from magazines with both EGM and Nintendo Power. It's thanks to these reviews, however, that the public was aware of it being out in the wild somewhere. Lost media enthusiasts scrambled for years in the hopes of possibly finding a review copy, and for years the case remained cold, until 2011, when they were hit with both good and bad news. The good news is that a prototype cartridge was not only found by what was said to be an ex-employee of Kaneko, but it was sold to a fan. Great, right? Now all we need to do is have them send it to the right people where they can dump the ROM and... Well, that leads us to the bad news. The buyer was no good Samaritan. You see, the buyer was one Jason Wilson, an arcade owner and video game collector who lives in Nashville. He was well aware of the gold nugget he had in his hands and had no intention of sharing it for free. He refused to dump a ROM as it would lower the value. But to prove he had it, his friend uploaded a 5-minute video taken on a crap camera and shared it online. Now, reports are conflicting on whether or not the video looks like crap because he wanted to rub in the fact that he was the only one with a copy of this game, or because it was the only camera his friend had. Surprisingly, by hoarding a one-of-a-kind game to yourself, then uploading intentionally crap footage to YouTube, he made a lot of enemies. The comments to the YouTube video were full of piss and vinegar, along with tons of forums completely trashing the guy for these actions. Later, Wilson reached out to a forum group and finally agreed that he'd release the game. For a price. Either $5,000, a Medieval Madness pinball machine, or stadium events for NES with box and manual. At the time, the other two items were around the same price, but I think Wilson's kicking himself after seeing what other people are asking for the latter two nowadays. In 2012, Tom Curtin, then a 41-year-old marketing manager, bought the game off of Wilson for what he claims to be the price of a decent used car. I assume he means $5,000, but I don't know. Along with going as far as to acquire the rights to Socks the Cat. Curtin's purchase wasn't without controversy, as many went from berating Wilson to Curtin for hogging the game to himself. After this flurry of disparaging comments, Curtin went out of his way to state that he had no intention of keeping the game to himself. Keeping to his word, Curtin began a campaign on Kickstarter 4 years later, in October of 2016, which promised not to just have a ROM uploaded, but instead, actual SNES reproduction carts, distributed to those who contributed enough. With all the hype around this game, alongside the upcoming election at the time, it should be no surprise that this game's campaign goal was not only reached, but was 110% funded, giving Curtin and crew the green light to finally bring this game into the hands of anticipating gamers. In a funny twist of fate, the game's campaign actually ended on election day. You know, there's a joke to be made somewhere about when this game got funded, Sox's owner lost the election. Actually, do you think Hillary even knows this game exists? The date is February 1st, 2018. The day the cat was finally let out of the bag. Those who contributed to the Kickstarter had their cartridges shipped out, with a ROM being dumped soon afterward. Socks the Cat was finally in the hands of the public. Now I know what you're thinking. Is the game good? I mean, after all that time, effort, and money, you'd think that the game that they were fighting for is a masterpiece. Well, let's take a little look-see at those scores and... oh... yeah, apparently the game was mostly described as a mediocre platformer. All outlets, on the other hand, loved the political commentary and humor sprinkled throughout. The adorable way they not only turned political symbols, but also figures into cartoonish boss fights saved the game from being an unmemorable platformer. So, was this adventure worth it? Endless research, $5,000, and years of patience for a game that's mediocre at best? Yeah, I'd say so. Beyond the concept being so bizarre, it would have been a shame had this game stayed lost like its Genesis counterpart. I'm a huge supporter of game preservation, and only hope that unlike old films or TV shows, where a massive chunk of some of their oldest media are lost to time, I'm hopeful that thanks to the power of emulation, along with select people, we're able to save more games from being stuck on aging software. Views like these are part of the reason why Nintendo and their constant cease and desist letters only serve to taint my point of view of them. But so long as people want to preserve and play their older games, rest assured that dolphin will never stop swimming. I mean, even if Nintendo tried to go after Dolphin, or another emulator, they should perhaps take a lesson from their arch nemesis of all things, as Sony attempted to sue an emulation software back in the day, only for the court to rule in favor of the emulator. After this, when was the last time you heard of a PlayStation emulator getting hit with a cease and desist? Even if the lost media in question was Superman 64, I still believe we have a duty to make sure that these video games, even the crappy ones, never get forgotten. With all that said, bye for now.